And for those who invest in people inside the workplace, realize that if trust isn't present, then you're not allowing that person to meet their full potential. If you're blocking them or eroding trust, then you don't get the best out of that employee when trust isn't there. And so let's redefine what trust looks like. Let's redefine humanizing each other.
Big change doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it starts with a single step. That's why I'm excited to host leaders, innovators, great thinkers, and everyday people sharing their stories and practical insights you can use right now. Wherever you are in your journey, whether you're just starting out, looking to make a pivot, or ready to reinvent yourself, you'll find both information and inspiration right here. This is Giant Steps, and I'm Leilani Brown. Good afternoon and welcome to Giant Steps with Leilani Brown. I am so excited to be in conversation with a person who I admire, who's doing the work, has been doing the work, and is also a dear friend. There's so much that I can say about my dear friend, Minda Harts, but I'm going to get started. She is a best-selling author. It is tracked by the newspapers, y'all. She's a best-selling author, workplace consultant, NYU professor, and the powerhouse behind books like and organizations like The Memo, Right Within, and now her transformative book on trust. Talk to me nice. The 7 Trust Languages for a Better Workplace. We should also note that Minda is a powerful storyteller and a filmmaker, and her first short is out and she's working on the next. I happen to know that. From boardrooms at Nike and Google to classrooms shaping the next generation of leaders, Minda has helped thousands rethink how they communicate, how they build relationships, and how they create environments where people can thrive. Her 7 trust languages, and we're going to talk about trust at work and what that means, could not be more timely in a world where workplaces are strained and trust is fractured and trust is breaking down around us. She offers a roadmap for leading with empathy, clarity, and courage. We were just talking, catching up behind the scenes before we started about how we've known each other for a long time. But I have not seen you live in a couple of years and was able to give you a big hug. But I hug you in welcoming you and saying thank you for our friendship. And also thank you for the work that you've been doing to advance talent over these many years that I've known you and before that. So welcome to the show. I can't wait to get into it.
Thank you, Leilani. I just have to say, because like you said, we are friends in real life. And Leilani was so generous when I stalked her many years ago when I was listening to her speak. Okay. And I've been latched onto her ever since. So thank you for letting me tag along over the years.
Of course, always and in all ways. So there's a lot that we can cover, but I'll just start. I'll start here. We are very intentional and deliberate this season on the podcast about talking about meeting the moment and talking about layoffs and what is happening in workplaces in every single sector. And so I think this conversation on trust is so timely as you have people onboarding, off ramping from different work environments and probably coming out of some work environments, not of their own decision, but if they reflected back on those workplaces, they could probably read your book in the 7 trust languages and determine that they weren't trustworthy environments. So I that's why I wanted to have this conversation right now with you, not the least of which is because the book is released and is so timely, but really to offer a framework for people to think about their expectations as they get back to work in this time, if that's fair. So you're still very active at different workplaces around the world, and those companies are calling you in to talk about trust. I suspect that those are some of our best workplaces that are talking about trust. And those companies want to create trustworthy environments for the employees who remain. What has that work been like for you literally right now?
Yeah, in real time, Leilani. I'm going in and having these conversations. And to be fair, a lot of people and a lot of companies, I think, were skeptical initially when I started talking about trust, because nobody wants to admit that trust doesn't live here, right? Or that
Mhm.
leaders aren't trustworthy. And I've had to do such a intentional job of saying two things can be true at the same time,
Right.
right? Nobody shows up intentionally saying, I want to erode trust, but through our behaviors, our actions, our decisions, there's some expectations that might get lost in the shuffle, and that creates that low trust environment. And when we can communicate better, then that makes sure that trust is always on the tracks, or at least we can talk about it when it diverts elsewhere, right? And I think coming at it from, we have an opportunity to communicate better, and that leads to higher trust, higher performance. Companies are like, yes, that makes sense because it's tied to the bottom line, right? And retention. And so I think uh, talking about trust just in a new way for people to see that there is no future of work without it.
Yeah. What are the 7 trust languages, and how do we know what our primary and secondary are? I read the book, and I know that there's a quiz inside the book, but if you could run through the 7 trust languages so that people really understand.
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned earlier, Leilani, about this expectation. And I think sometimes our trust is not necessarily on the ground because we don't trust someone. That could be true, but there's an expectation that's not being met that they may or may not know is primary to us. And so these 7 languages might resonate more for you and more for others. But really quickly, transparency, that clarity and honesty. Security is the psychological safety and belonging. Demonstration is doing what you say, the show and the tell, the behavior
Mhm.
matching the values. Feedback is having a loop and having meaningful, consistent insight. And when you think about these languages, also thinking about how you reciprocate them. So if somebody's giving you feedback in a meaningful and consistent way, how am I responding in a meaningful and consistent way so that trust still stays on the tracks? Acknowledgement is that seeing people and their work. Some people just need a job well done, and that specificity. Sensitivity, that empathy around our behaviors, and maybe it doesn't bother us to take the joke, but it harms somebody else. So being
Mhm.
sensitive and empathetic to that. And lastly, where did it follow through? Keeping your word, right?
Right.
Sometimes we're just trust is on the ground because we keep telling people we're going to do something and never following through.
Yeah. You had an anecdote in the book, and I don't wanna give too much away. I do want people to purchase the book and read it fully, but you had an experience in the book in your early part of your career where you had a boss demonstrate that he was trustworthy, and then, somebody within by sharing some information so that you could plan and act accordingly with the team, and there was somebody who betrayed that offer and that generosity to counter to that. Can you explain how you experienced your first experiences of trust and lack of trustworthiness in that through that scenario?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because I think sometimes in our romantic relationships, in our platonic relationships, trust is like we better have it or else, right? That's a non-negotiable. But at work,
Right.
we kind of keep it very ambiguous. Well, you're just not going to trust people, right? And I think we kind of lean into that, but it shouldn't be that way. That's not normal, right? So,
Mhm.
so I didn't realize that trust was as important to me until a former manager of mine sat our team down and pretty much said, "Winter is coming, layoffs are around the corner. Let's get you all up on your skills. Make sure you're leveling up, coaching, but I want you to be able to make decisions because I know how it feels when you're blindsided." And I didn't realize how important that information was. He put his neck out on the line, and I realized that transparency was a strong trust language for me, right? Having some clarity, having some honesty. And one of our team members ended up pretty much telling on him that he gave us that heads up, and eventually he lost his job. And there sometimes is a cost when we're transparent, but I also talk about in the book how we can be transparent and leave people breadcrumbs without things just blindsiding them completely, because we
Right.
can still leave people with their humanity and dignity even when we have to have tough conversations.
Yeah. I'm thinking about I'm still focused so much on layoffs because I
Hmm.
feel such empathy for people who are blindsided in that way.
Yeah.
And then for the folks that remain, their trust may have been eroded too. They're wondering and worrying, uh, lack of transparency. Am I next? And what
Right.
if this happens to me? I had a recent uh, session and workshop with a group of people who remained after a mass layoff. I'm not going to say the client or the company, after a mass layoff. And we had to start by holding space really for the people that remain and that experience that as a workplace trauma. I
Mhm.
think lack of trust is a workplace trauma. What are you seeing right now from people who come up to you after the speeches and they have something to say? And I just have a question for you.
Yeah. I mean, it is traumatizing, right? I mean, just think about it. Like, you show up to work at 9 a.m. and by like 10:10 you're told to pack your bags or leave. That's traumatizing, right? After you just had a all staff retreat last week. And I think that sometimes our leaders, again, it's not intentional that you would want to do this to someone. I mean, layoffs happen, reorgs happen. That's just the nature of business. But the way we disseminate that information, we probably knew that that layoff was coming, not at 10:10, right? We could have prepared people. We could have had different kinds of conversations so that
Mhm,
people realize that, you know what, this is not a performance issue. This is a business case right now, and we're not able to, right? Being able to explain it so that people don't fill in the gaps for themselves. Because if we fill in the gaps with the story or the narrative, it's going to be probably worse than what someone else might have said. But I think leaders, we can still have, again, have tough conversations and provide clarity for people.
mhm.
And again, leave people with their humanity intact. Their employees first. I'm sorry, their humans first, employees second. And I think sometimes we forget that. And
Right,
so the trauma, you're taking that sense of fear and anxiety into the next role, right? Or for those, like you said, who kind of have the survivor's remorse, you're waking up every day doing your job, not knowing if you're going to make it till 5 because you just
right.
seen what happened. And again, the data shows us that when trust is present, 74% of us are less anxious. And if trust
Mhm.
is present, we're 21% more productive. So you tell me, I can
Yeah,
get the most out of somebody being a little more transparent and being a little honest, or they're not going to get their work done because they're going to be fretting all day about
yeah.
what's may or may not be coming, right?
So what can the individual do? I'm going to ask the individual from two standpoints: the employee, the worker, right, and the management. What can both do to kind of balance trust? Obviously, if there's a mass layoff coming and you're sworn to secrecy and you have confidentiality and things are playing out, you can't say everything,
Mm-hmm.
but you can do some things. And so what should the leader be doing on their side, and then what should we be doing as employees or people who might be anticipating this type of action?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because leaders, it again, trust is a two-way street, so we can't leave it on everybody else to go take the LinkedIn learning courses and do all the things, right,
Right,
to land their next best
right.
job. But while people are here as leaders, we should be coaches, right? We should be helping people prepare for whatever next role that they are. And so even if you can't tell them, hey, yes, in 2 weeks you're going to get laid off, you could still be a great leader and say, you know, let's look at your skill set. Where are some areas that we can start to, you know, provide more training? We could still help people along the way. And I think that, again, having conversations. So maybe I do tell you an hour after you've settled in that you're no longer here, but let me at least tell you thank you for your tenure. Thank you for your service, right? If I can be a resource, if I can be a reference, use me, right? Don't just pretend that we have never worked together for the last 10 years,
Right,
right? And
right,
I think
right,
it's as a leader, we could still bring that humanity to
right.
the table when we're talking to people and saying, hey, what resources do you need, right? Reminding people even ahead of time, use our employee resource group if you need additional support, right? Even if I can't say the things, we
Hmm.
still we can say things without saying them. And I think that prepares people. And then on the other end, as individuals, we may not know when that time is coming, right? Things are very volatile, but I think we can still have conversations with our managers to say, you know what, I really appreciate it when you provide a little more clarity in these moments. I work best when I have that. And that signals to people, your leaders that you report into, that you value that transparency. You value that. And
Right.
then also, I'm showing that to you, right? When there's opportunities for me to show transparency, I'm doing that as well, right? Maybe return
Hmm.
to work or hybrid work environment. I'm doing those things to build the trust as well.
Yeah. I think too, on the leader side, if you're in the room, you can, even if you're the lone voice at the table, be the voice for a more humanized experience. And if things are going, not to suggest that every company is going through this in a less than humane way, but
Mhm.
making sure that you are advocating for a direction, a tone, a more humanizing experience. What can we do? And then the other thing is, I would think it very important, committing to share what you can share when you can share it. And that is every PR or crisis comms strategist number one tool, right? It's just say,
Mhm.
I don't know, I can't say, but I will come back to you directly when I have more to share. This is what I can share now. I'll come back to you when I have more to share.
And you know what? On the other end of that, even if I just seen 10 of my colleagues, get walked out the door, I'm going to say, wow, okay, I can trust this leader enough that they're going to be honest with me when they have
Mhm.
information, and that's going to settle my nervous system, right? The other part of that, like you said, is being that person in the room and saying, hey, we don't have to let people know this morning, right? Or make them work all day. There's a better way to maybe handle this, right? And I think that we want to make those decisions and have those conversations where trust is still present. And I believe that we can do that.
Yeah. So beyond the layoff, if you're still in an organization or if you're leading within an organization, where does trust break down elsewhere? So, I know that you've talked about a couple of instances, taking credit for someone's
Mhm.
work, giving, virtual signaling or false promotions, employee of the month for 12 years running,
Yeah.
versus a raise, or, where else does it break down so that people can recognize it and recognize trust as a concrete element of working as opposed to a, vague concept.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the beautiful thing about trust is that it's a universal language. We may work with our colleagues, and maybe not all of us may speak English, but we all understand when trust is present and when it's gone, right? So that's a fundamental, I think, value that most people appreciate in the workplace. And I think that the other part of that is saying, um, if I'm working in a remote environment, if I have people on my team, am I micromanaging them? Right? I think that's another one that comes across all across the boards, across the globe. Am I hovering over people? Oh, you didn't have your camera on. That means you must be in Tahiti, swimming with the whales. Or if your green light isn't on, that must mean something else. And it's like, I think that we need to take more things into consideration instead of jumping to the conclusion that Leilani's camera's off, so that must mean she's not working anymore. To say,
Yeah,
Leilani, I noticed that you typically have your camera on in our meetings, and lately you haven't. Is everything okay? Right? Just
right.
wanted to check in. That's
Benefit
a
of the
better
doubt.
that's a better conversation, and I'm going to open up the door to you to be honest with me. You know what? Yeah, my father has Alzheimer's. I've been dealing with a lot, so some days I can't turn my camera on, just so you know. Right now, we're
Right,
having a trusting conversation where we both can be vulnerable. We both can
right.
practice a few different languages here, right? But when
Yeah,
we shut down, make people shut down, and we manage with fear, that's not enhancing trust.
yeah. So if it's been broken or if it's starting
Mhm.
to erode, what are some of the things that we can do to improve it? And I would say from the employee side, sometimes we don't really recognize how empowered we are to even invite those conversations, even providing the language and providing the framework. But what are some of the things that are within our control in terms of stimulating and catalyzing trust in a workplace?
Yeah, I don't know if you remember this, Leilani, but I heard you say once on a panel, and when someone asked me the question, what's the best piece of advice you ever received? You didn't give it to me per se, but I took it. You said, don't be ambiguous about your career. And I think that's important in the workplace. Don't just
Yeah,
let people fill in the blanks for you, right? If you need something, then let's close this expectation gap with people. Let people know what good looks like to you. So, of course, you're not going to tell your manager, I don't trust you anymore because you didn't do X, Y, and Z. But like our families used to tell us, it's not what you say, but how you say it, right? So
how
if
you
you
say it.
need
Yeah.
if trust has been broken or you feel there's low trust, think about if you were on the other end of that, how would you want someone to talk to you about it, but to give you the opportunity to make it better, right? So, and I think that's the piece of it, right? We could still tell people what we need and not cut them down or dismiss them. And I think when things have been broken, giving people the opportunity to practice the language of demonstration, that
Yeah.
consistently doing and showing me that it's possible. Because if we can have a breakdown in trust, I believe that we can build it back up through that consistency.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, and it brings it back. I can almost remember where we were, but I think also is not kinda sorta wanting it,
Mm-hmm.
or this idea that we are not gonna be overtly or openly ambitious, because we wanna manage our expectations and keep them, sort of low. There is another, thing, though, that you so eloquently point out, is that you don't lead with how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Which and I think for women, for people of any difference, but women in particular, um, we may be led to lead with feelings over facts. And I like that you have spun it around as a tactical, strategy to say to lead with the facts.
Yeah.
This happened. This is what I experienced, and then an invitation, a question. Why do you continue to call me Lizette when she clearly works in another department, but she just happens to be a Black woman? I'm
Yeah.
just saying, there was actually a woman who looked nothing like me other than she was a Black woman.
They never
Like,
do.
there couldn't never, I mean, it just, we could not be more similar, more dissimilar. But um, I wonder if you could give us an example of how to reframe an instance. So let's just say, for example, I'm
Mm-hmm.
constantly being compared or called Lizette. I am literally a first level officer at the company, and she is, no shade to her, an administrative assistant working for one of the presidents on in another department. And
Mm-hmm.
people would pass her by and pass me by, and they would call us, alternate the names. So how would what's your best reframing versus me saying, "I feel very disrespected that you are confusing the 2 of us. Can you not get our names right?" What's a better way to reframe that broken trust?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Well, first off, I want to say that we're probably, if we're being called the wrong name, we're ruminating on that and we're creating, I can't trust this person. And all the while, they're not even thinking about us, nor do they know
Right,
or care that they've been calling us the wrong name. Right. But
right,
we're spinning our wheels over this and crashing out. So, for our own mental health and well being, and if you want trust in a more harmonious relationship with this colleague, then that's for us, right? To tell that person that this is important and who you are because you've been working together. And so approaching it and just say, "Hey, Steve, I just wanted to bring something to your attention because we work together so much. And I know it probably was an oversight, but my name is Leilani. I noticed that you on occasions call me Lizette, but Lizette works in another department. So I just want to make sure that we're not making that mistake anymore. Thanks for allowing me to be able to come and have that conversation with you, right?" And that's
right,
it, to be able to have it. I don't have to be, you don't know your Black people, you don't know, I don't have to do that.
right.
Right? But
'Cause it's
I
a lot of
still,
energy. It's a
it's a
lot of
lot of
energy.
energy. I mean,
Yeah,
I might want to, right? But I don't want to. I want to keep the facts the facts. My name is this. This is her, making you aware of
mhm.
it. And the other part that I want to call out, because I think we've all done it a time or two, called someone the wrong name. So when that person who's been making that mistake sees you in the hallway, don't just dart the other way because you don't want to make that mistake again, right? So, that's
To
also
say,
an erosion. Yeah,
"Uh-uh."
you know what? Make a joke of it. Be like, Leilani, right? I would
Right,
rather
like,
somebody
yes.
try that than be like, never
Right,
talk to me again when they see me, right? And so I
yes,
think, again, these are those ways that we get to rise to the occasion and show up for each other, right? Because you would want someone to do that for you, and we don't have to take that, or again, you don't have to think that I'm being mean to you or rude to you or whatever, fill in the blanks. We just have the conversation and we can get things
yeah.
back on the tracks and focus on our work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So another erosion of trust or example of erosion of trust is someone taking credit for your work. whether it's a colleague or a boss? What can an individual do, and what can allies do in that example?
Yeah, I mean, this happens probably 10 times a day to some people. And again, these
Hmm.
are erosions of trust. And if I'm a leader and I'm seeing this happening, especially on my team, I'm going to be conscious of it, and I'm not going to keep letting it sweep it under the rug and just be like, oh, that's just Jennifer being Jennifer. No, I'm going to say, actually, Minda gave that idea originally 2 weeks ago, and I apologize that I didn't bring it to the forefront. Minda, do you want to chime in on that a little bit more? I'm going to create that space in the room to call it out so that I
Hmm.
normalize what good looks like in the room. And you know what that's going to signal to Jennifer or whoever else wants to start co-opting? That we don't do that here anymore.
Right, right,
This isn't the
right,
environment that we do it. I don't have to holler out at Jennifer, how many times are you going to take Minda's ideas from her, right? Because that's
right.
not going to enhance trust. It's going to create fear. But I'm setting the score. And I'm also using another language. I'm acknowledging Minda to say your ideas are safe here. Another language, secure, right? Your intellectual security is important here. And I'm signaling that to everybody in the room. And I think those are things that we can do. And as an ally, we can do that too, right? Oh,
Right.
Leilani said that same thing, 2 months ago. I think we should have her chime in about this as well, right? Again, calling
Yeah.
people out, naming it, that's easy to do.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to ask the question in parallel to what we might experience in our social relationships or even our romantic relationships. And then the question becomes, how do I trust again?
Yeah.
Right? How do I trust again if I'm going to a new company, a new organization? How do I present myself as healed when I go into an interview after a situation or organization that was less than ideal? And I ask that question because you might have left an organization or a workplace or a circumstance that was less than positive and
Mm-hmm.
made you energetically so negative about work in general, and then have a desire to move to the healthy one. But you can't really move effectively to the healthy one until you yourself have gotten rid of it. So, what advice do you have to have people uh, really be more ready for the next move and not bring some of the old habits into the new workplace?
Yeah. Well, therapy if you're open to it, but I think that healing has to take place, right? But I think first we have to that self trust, right? Know that you didn't do anything to create that environment necessarily in your past life, but your next best thing could literally be in front of you, and you don't want to bring those same, or you don't want to show signs of low trust because you've just experienced it, right? And so I talk a little bit about in the book when you're interviewing and when you're going into a situation, some of the trust languages that you didn't experience that you might have needed, ask those questions in the interview process, right? You don't have to say,
Right.
uh, my trust language is feedback. What does that look like to you? Because they may not know what that is. But if there's certain areas or that we're lacking, this is when you get to have those scenario based questions. Say, when this happens, how do you typically handle that? And that will
Right.
inform you. But I also think we have to give people a chance to demonstrate, right? Start with the cup full, and when people start to show you otherwise, then you can kind of start to tip it out a bit, but allow people to demonstrate that this could be a healthy environment because you miss out, right? It's an opportunity for a missed opportunity for growth if you don't allow your colleagues to show you what trust could look like.
Are there any trust questions that might be good for a user or listener here on an interview? So not quoting from the book. We do suggest that you get the book. We don't suggest that you walk into the interview and say, talk to me nice.
Yes.
But I but roll with me a little bit on this. So would it be, tell me how you process or share feedback with your staff? What's the best way to, what can I expect with respect to exposure to other parts of the company or leadership? What are some other questions that we might ask in an interview to assess whether a place is trustworthy?
Right. Well, that is a great question. So I hope people will add that to there. to their list. But I'd also say, let's say acknowledgement is something that you never received, right? So you could ask a question around recognition. Team morale is really important to me when people are, hitting the goals or the targets. How do you recognize those people for a job well done? Just curious what that looks like, right? That's going to signal to you. Someone's going to say, "Oh, no news is good news." That's going to signal to you that
Yeah.
probably isn't the primary trust language if that's what you really are looking for. Now, that's
Right.
something you can advocate for if you're not getting it, right? But I think questions around that, or I really thrive off of feedback. In past environments, I haven't always received it consistently. Can you talk about how feedback shows up on teams and what does that loop look like, right? Asking
Mhm.
those questions to kind of, you can gauge what type of manager you're going to be working with or what your colleagues are like based off of how they respond. And lastly, I would ask, I really value a harmonious team environment. What does trust look like to you? What is a
Right.
trustworthy team, right? And you'll start to hear kind of what people have to say or what they don't say, right?
Right. Or whether they've ever thought about it, and
That
and
too.
how do they feel even about the question. So,
Yes. That alone too, yeah, will tell you a lot.
yes. Minda, this podcast used to be called Your First Job, really because I wanted to talk to people about their career, the arcs of their career, and to debunk the understanding that there are overnight sensations. So, but you are not new to this, but true to this. You've been doing this work for a long time, first as what you would also call a side hustle, and now full time. But you had a career before that. There are other things that you're doing, which we want to get into. But can you talk to us about your first job coming out of college?
Yeah, I was Lizette down the hallway. I was at the admin.
Nothing wrong
No,
with Lizette. Shout out to Lizette. I changed her name.
I was her, and that was my first job. Right, it was a tough job market, and I took my communication skills and landed a job as an executive assistant, and that was my first job. And I would say that I learned so much about soft skills, leadership skills in that role that prepared me for what I do today. I had no idea.
I wish you could say it louder for the people in the back,
Hmm.
especially for the class of 24, class of 25, and early career, which is that there are no small jobs, you aren't underemployed, and that those early career experiences, even as an administrative assistant or a part time assistant or whatever it is depending on the company, are valuable and meaningful.
I wish that I would have told myself that at the time because I didn't feel that way in the environment I was working. But looking back now, I could say, God, those were some of the. I cut my teeth on a lot of things that helped me generationally, right, in ways,
Yeah.
and just so yeah, never discount that first gig,
I
please.
have to say, because I had my stints in the summer as a because I worked for temp firms, and so I
Hmm.
had a ton of experience working for as an administrative assistant. And I wonder if you find this to be true. Those days and those lessons that I learned as an administrative assistant helped me so much today as an entrepreneur because I understand the mindset of a gatekeeper, of a calendar keeper, of a person who gets invoices paid, of like all I understand all of those things because I was on that side of the desk.
Yes. 1000%.
It
You know what? Listen, I would just say I think that every training program, everyone should be an administrative assistant to some degree because it
yes,
does provide a lot of
first
training.
3 to 6 months.
Yes.
So you're speaking, you're teaching, you're doing workshops, you are writing, and you are now filmmaking. Why did you decide to take this turn and to share, I think, practical storytelling, practical tools through storytelling and film? Tell me about that. The first short, the memo, which I saw, and it was delightful. It starred Kyla Pratt as you. So, but tell me about that experience.
Leilani, a lot of people don't know this, but I always wanted to be in film and TV, but I never knew it was possible. right? Sometimes we're just not dreaming big enough because you don't see the path itself. But I've always been writing plays as a young girl, and even some were um, presented in front of my youth group where they acted them out and things of that sort. So I always was a storyteller. I didn't realize that. But during COVID, I decided that at some point I wanted to tell these stories in a different way, because you may never read the book, but can I hit you kind of in the heart in other ways? And I started taking screenwriting classes and investing in myself, because I knew at some point I would be able to do it. And then I prepared for my next best thing, which allowed for the memo to come. And I had no idea, right? That when I took those screenwriting classes initially, 4 years later, the memo short film, right?
So 4 years later. So, and then we were talking before, this book was 5 years ago in
Mm-hmm.
construct, and sort of just out now. So there are no overnights. What did you
No.
learn about filmmaking, about yourself through filmmaking?
I think I realized that it's okay to be a multi hyphenate, right? I think that what I have, I think at first I wanted to shy away from even calling myself that. But what I realized, I am a storyteller, whether it's inside the workplace or outside the workplace. And we have control over our stories, just like the books and the stories I told, I still get to do that. But with film. And it's been really, really gratifying to be able, people who never read the memo, they go back and read the memo because of Kyla's performance, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. So leave us with a note of optimism for the future. Not only what are you working on, but why should we be optimistic about the future and thinking about it for ourselves?
Yeah, I'm an optimist. And so I do believe our best days really, truly are ahead, but they're ahead when we learn to A, trust ourselves, right? So even if you've had bad experiences, know that to trust your gut, to follow that voice that sometimes you may have questioned, but know that it's got you this far, and it's going to take you somewhere even further. And for those who um, invest in people inside the workplace, realize that if trust isn't present, then you're not allowing that person to meet their full potential. If you're blocking them or eroding trust, then you don't get the best out of that employee when trust isn't there. And so let's redefine what trust looks like. Let's redefine humanizing each other. And when we do that, I think together our best days are still ahead. And I think most of us want that.
Absolutely. Minda, where can people find out more about you and your work and purchase your book?
Yes, please go to mindaharts.com, and from there you can find me on whatever social platform you like to play on.
That's great. MindaHarts. That's where you can find Minda. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing some time. And I miss you. I can't wait to see you live one of these days.
We have many hugs to catch up on. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. This podcast is a production of Giant Steps LLC, a company working at the intersection of strategy, culture, career, and education. I'm Leilani Brown, CEO and host of the show. Many thanks to Jaira Michael, our executive producer, and S. Maxwell Brown, producer and editor of this episode. You can learn more about our company at giantstepsllc.com. We hope you enjoyed this episode and others. Please be sure to follow, like, and share our show far and wide. Thank you for listening.